Thank you, delegates. It's now my honor to present to you Dr. David Coletto, the CEO of Abacus Data, as a guest speaker to our AGM. David is no stranger to PIPS. Where are you, David? All right, there he is. David is no stranger to PIPS. He spoke to our Young Professionals Forum last year, and his presentation was great. And I heard from so many members who were in the room that we needed to engage David more deeply in our membership engagement strategies. So this year, we recruited David to conduct our membership survey. What he brought to the project was a decade of experience working in marketing and research industry, and his astute observations as an industry leader in online research methodologies, public affairs research, organizational reputational studies, and youth research. David is an outspoken proponent of the transparency in the polling industry, and Abacus Data has the honor of having presented the most accurate polling projections in this year's federal election. Earning a doctorate from the University of Calgary in 2010, David is also an adjunct professor and instructor at Carleton University. Today, David will share his analysis of the results of our most recent membership engagement survey. Please join me in welcoming David to our 100th annual general meeting.
Well, good morning, delegates. Thank you, Debbie, for that introduction and that very inspiring speech. You have accomplished a lot in the past year, and I'm here to say that your membership across the country has noticed. And so it's a real pleasure to be here to present the survey that we conducted. Before I get into that, I just wanted to say I feel kind of like if you watch the Oscars, you know, the accounting firm they always hire to make sure that all the votes are cast correctly and make sure all the envelopes are secure. So I feel like that guy a little bit, but it is a pleasure to be here. Very quickly, for the methodology folks in the room, let me just share with you what we did. And we did a national survey. We had over almost 68. Today, and we made sure that the survey was representative of the membership across all of those demographics, across bargaining groups, and across regions of the country. I want to start, though, with a little bit of the context. Debbie spoke about it already. I know Hassan will speak about it after my presentation. But as someone who spends a lot of time studying public opinion, not only the memberships of unions like yours, but the general public, it's clear to me that over the past number of years, concerns about issues have shifted. There is deep concern about growing inequality in our society. There is growing concern about the impact that climate change will have not only today, but going forward. Changes in the economy and the workplace are increasingly top of mind. And so all of these forces, I think, ultimately come down to a growing concern among Canadians across the country that they are losing control over their own lives, control over their careers, control over even their voice in how public policy is made here in Ottawa and provincial capitals across the country. And so they're looking for a voice. They're looking for a voice in their workplace, in their day-to-day lives, and in the broader society in which they take part. And so when you ask yourselves, what's the role of a union in all of this? Right? The context is changing as technological and generational change disrupts much of the world. But I also believe, based on my research, based on asking Canadians a whole bunch of questions, that the perceived value of collective action will grow as individuals realize that doing it alone is not sufficient. And so when it comes to PIPSC and its members, all of those that you represent here today as delegates, I think the value proposition of what you do every single day is clear, but that effort needs to continue. You can't give up continuing to demonstrate the value of your union to your members. So let me share some of the results. The first, a quick profile of the membership that we surveyed. Gender, 58% identified as male, 42% as female. 28% of the membership are under the age of 40, 40% over the age of 50, which is a feature of the general public service, that it's aging, but you have a new generation of members who are coming in. 91% of your membership have a post-secondary degree. Over a quarter were born outside of Canada. 6% identify as having a disability, and just about half live here in the National Capital Region, about half live outside of it, okay? And so I'll start with some good news. There's lots of good news in this survey, but as Debbie already alluded to, 81% of members across the country express satisfaction overall with the work that your union has done. 31% strongly satisfied, another 50% somewhat satisfied. And I do a lot of work in a lot of different sectors. This is a very solid number. Any organization, any association, any brand would love to have 8 out of 10 of its customers, its members, its voters, its citizens, you name it, expressing support. But the good news here is not only that it's high today, but that it's increasing. As Debbie said, the number of those who said they are very satisfied has doubled over 3 years, from 15% in 2016 to 31% in 2019. And so, as you think about the work that you have all done, that the leadership, as well as those stewards and those at the local level, there's, I think, a clear recognition that the success of this union in the wins that is achieved in representing members through some fairly challenging times has helped. And another measure we use is we ask, since you joined PIPS, has your impression improved? Has it become more positive? Has it become more negative? Again, a positive number, 45%. More than double the number who say their impressions have gotten worse or more negative, say they've become more positive. And so what drives this impression? Well, one of the questions we often ask is, how would you describe your union, right? Between two different questions. And so we show respondents, and many of you may have answered this survey. How many of you answered this survey, by the way, here? I hope most of you. Great. So you saw this question. We ask you that you pick between two statements. Which one best describes PIPS? And you can see from the top down, these are really solid numbers. Over almost 9 out of 10 describe the union as fair. 84% describe it as approachable, accessible, protects their interests, right? These are all things that, if you think of the mission of your union, they're front and center, you're achieving those. Even if you go down the list, effective, helps people like me, understands me and people like me. 71% think that this union is something they care about. Now on the flip side, 30% say they don't really care too much about what happens in this union, something that you need to continue to work on. 70% describe PIPS as a modern organization as opposed to one that's old-fashioned. So these are very positive and, comparatively speaking, quite solid. Now there are some areas for improvement, or areas to consider and to reflect on as you work through your day here today and around the AGM. The first is this question of responsiveness. Now 69% is still a solid number, but 31% of members believe that PIPS is slow to respond to their requests. The question of whether it's a community, right? 36% say that their union is more like a service, right? Like insurance for when things get tough, and not really like a community, something that they actively participate in. But perhaps the most important thing to reflect on is the last item on that slide there. I see people like me in the union leadership. 46% say that, as opposed to a majority of members who say I don't see myself, or people like myself, in the leadership. And so what does that mean? It's about representation, it's about diversity, it's about also attitudes, right? People like me doesn't always have to be who look like me, but people who think and share the same values of me. And as is clear in this survey, most members share likely the values of everybody here in this room, but they may not know it. And so it's about communicating and expressing those values going forward. Now, one of the other areas we explored in this survey is the question of dues. Money is something we talk a lot about, and so we asked members, how would you describe the value of the dues that you pay to PIPSC? And you can see that a clear majority say that the value they pay is at least acceptable, right? With almost a third saying that they describe it as either very good or good value. These are positive numbers. There's not a lot of members out there who feel that the dues that they send to PIPS aren't well spent, right? Is not a good investment of their hard-earned money. And when we compare this over time, these numbers are close to what we've seen. But one of the most important questions we explored, because when we did this survey, we weren't sure what the outcome of the election might be. And with a minority government, we could be in an election sooner than later, and depending on who wins, the question of the RAND formula remains up in the air. And so we wanted to explore, and this is something that PIPS has done over the years, is what would happen if dues were not mandatory for members? And so we asked, what's the likelihood that you would continue to pay your dues to PIPS even if you were not required to do so? And you can see the first good news is that we've seen a 5-point increase in those who say they are either very or somewhat likely to do that. I think that reflects the increased satisfaction that members feel. 26% on the other hand say they're unlikely to do so. And so this expresses again the risk to PIPS if any of these rules change. And I'll come back to this data point in a moment. But so the question then is, what is the value of this union to its members? And so we asked, what would happen if PIPS did not exist to these parts or aspects of your work, your benefits, your wages, your job security, your retirement finances and working conditions? Clearly a majority of members say that if PIPS was not here to defend them, to fight for them, all of those things would be worse off than they are today. So there's a clear recognition by a clear majority of your membership that the work that you do every day matters and has an impact. But as you go down that list and you start to reflect on what it is PIPS can do for that next generation of member, right? Opportunity for advancement, relationship with my employer. These are areas where you may not have a particular role, but your membership doesn't think that things would be all that different if PIPS wasn't there. But on the core things that you fight for, in fact, the things that members say are most important to fight for, they recognize that if PIPS was not there to defend them, things would, in their workplace, would be worse on all of those aspects. Now, 78% of members agree that PIPS leadership is representative of the views of professional workers like them. That's a good number. That's solid, right? That is a strong signal that members are confident that their views, their perspectives are represented in the leadership, and many of you who represent those members across the country here in this room. Now, the question of presence in the workplace, majority of members agree that PIPS has a strong presence in my workplace, but 43% say they either disagree or they don't know. Again, a reflection of an opportunity there to continue to raise the profile of your union in your workplace, to demonstrate its value and what it is you fight for every day. And part of that is advocacy, right? A clear majority, 59% of members say they want PIPS to be more involved in political advocacy activities, especially given the uncertainty in our political system these days, right? And now with the minority government here in Ottawa, the uncertainty of what happens next and the opportunities to influence policy. We asked the question about the relationship between PIPS and the government and your employer. And what we find is that 7 out of 10 members think that that relationship is about right. It's not too cozy, it's not too antagonistic. I've done other work with other unions and we ask a similar question, and this is as positive a number as I've seen. You found the right balance to most of your members. Now, I will say you're never going to satisfy everybody, right? But the fact that 70% of members say today that you have found the right direction, the right balance between being aggressive and collaborative, I think is a good sign going forward. Let me wrap up then with what members want you to focus on going forward. What are the priority areas? As Debbie already alluded to, pensions is number one. 80% of members put pensions, protecting pensions in their top 5 priorities for PIPS going forward. Another 71% said better pay, and 70% protect health benefits. Those are the core things that you find consensus more or less among the membership. But the other point is that on this list of things that we tested, there's a lot of diversity in your union in terms of what they're looking for. Another, about half say they're looking to strive to improve work-life balance. 40% say they want you to defend members against bad employer decisions, or 38% want a focus on career advancement. Less as a priority down this list, but still a priority to a significant number of members: family or community responsibility protections, ensuring pay equity, creating a safe workplace without harassment, and you can see down that list. And the thing to say is that members don't necessarily think these aren't important. We ask them to pick 5, right? So that's still about 1 out of 5 members, even though the item on the bottom of this list, 1 out of 5 members, 17%, say concerns with transition to open concept workplaces is a priority they'd like this union to focus on. And I will note there's some differences across demographic groups on some of these. As Debbie said, protecting pensions is the #1 concern across the membership, regardless of demographic, region, or bargaining group. But as you would expect, younger members put a greater priority on some things than older members. For example, younger members want this union to make more of a priority, striving to improve work-life balance, ensuring that there's opportunities for career advancement, and fighting for better pay, whereas older members are slightly more likely to want you to defend their pensions, to prevent contracting and outsourcing of work, and defending members against bad decisions by the employers. But the gaps aren't as large as you think, and that shows there's unity across the membership. So let me wrap up then with what I think this all means as you deliberate here at your AGM. The first is the good news that membership satisfaction is up. I'd like to be here to be able to say that, right? A doubling of those that are very satisfied, a 10-point increase in overall satisfaction is a demonstration that this union is headed in the right direction from their members' perspective. As I said, those key metrics about how people feel about the union, about their priority areas, about satisfaction with the work that you're doing are all headed in the right direction, but there is still some work to do on some areas, right? Focus on the 3 priority areas of pay, pensions, and benefits, but recognize and respond to, it's important, the diversity in your membership in terms of what they think is important. I describe in the report that we wrote a group of members, what I call fence sitters. About the largest group in the membership, about 4 out of 10 members are fence sitters when it comes to that question of whether they would pay dues if they had to. They are those who say they are somewhat likely or they're unsure whether they would pay it. And that group is important because that group will determine the future of the union, about its direction, right? You need to convince them that the work that you do here, the work that you do every day matters. And so what do you need to do to bring those fence sitters to become core supporters of this union, to become advocates, to become activists? I think there's 3 things that you can do. It first starts with helping those members and continuing to speak and tell the story about how PIPS improves their pay, pensions, and benefits. As it's clear majorities think that if PIPS wasn't here, all of those things would be worse off than they are today. You have to also build a stronger sense that the union leadership, including all of you in this room, is like those that you represent. Remind them, because it's true, they just don't know it, or they just don't understand it or recognize it. Finally, you need to continue as a union to provide value-added services that go beyond the core priorities and look at things like training, such as retirement planning, career advancement, and helping them develop soft skills, things that you wouldn't normally think are in the purview of a trade union or a professional union like yourselves, but are things that particularly younger members are looking to the union to support. And so as you think ahead, as you think about the future, the next 100 years, I encourage you to think about what generational change means for PIPS and how you define the membership going forward. I work with a number of unions, and I'm just going to wrap up with this statement, and I've conducted dozens of surveys with different unions and associations across the country, and I can confidently say that PIPS is in a very solid position with a membership that feels the union represents them well, serves their interests, and fights for the things that they care about. But the threats to unity persist. Generational change, technological change, shifts in the economy and the workplace, and the evolving relationship between the employees and the employer requires that you all consider that value proposition, rethink what it means to be a union, and the services that you can provide. It's been a pleasure to work with this team, and thank you for the time to address you today. Have a great rest of your AGM.